know me and are familiar with my work with Status Coup. Hey, Holly. I see folks are starting to filter into the chat. I'm really excited to see everyone today. I am going to be filling in for Jordan because he is traveling back from Washington, D.C., where he held an event with Crystal Ball yesterday to help promote his book and to talk about the important work he was doing about the 10-year cover up of the Flint water crisis. The name of the book, if you guys haven't heard of it yet, is We the Poisoned, Exposing the Flint Water Crisis Cover-Up and the Poisoning of 100,000 Americans. It's available on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. I'm not sure yet if the event with Crystal was recorded. If it was, though, please make sure that your notification bells are on. We'll have that rolling. Also, Jordan will be heading to Philadelphia tomorrow. So he's busy on the ground. So he's asked for us to help cover today. But he will be in Philadelphia tomorrow with John Farina covering the presidential debate. So please have your notifications turned on for that live stream. We're not sure exactly when that live stream will start. I know that there's going to be protest on the ground in Philadelphia surrounding the debate. Also, as they generally do, they may be out talking to voters and talking to the public. So please turn your notifications on. It'd be fascinating to hear people's thoughts tomorrow on the ground in Philadelphia at this debate. Also, check out some of Status Coup's latest reporting. Jordan's been traveling all over the place, not only for this book, but everywhere he's been traveling for the book. He's also been stopping to do local journalism. So he has had stories from out of Michigan regarding the uncommitted movement, as well as the Abandon Harris movement. He has been talking to people about the Flint water crisis. We've had recent reporting in East Palestine, Ohio as well. So he's been a little bit of everywhere. And it would be great to go in and check out some of that reporting, as well as John Farina's reporting on the ground of protest. He's been doing some great work covering protests. So please go and check out Status Coup and see what we've got up on the docket. I think that about covers what's been happening and what's coming up. So today, what we'll be talking about, Trump is leading in the polls. So it seems like the whole girl boss vibes momentum, the bubble kind of swelled, and now it's deflating a little bit. And as we saw in 2016, as we saw in 2020, can't always trust the polls, but that is what they're showing right now. So we'll be talking about that as well. Also be talking about a crazy statement that Trump made on Truth Social about how he's going to arrest anyone that he believes is committing electoral fraud, and it gets even crazier than that. So we'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about Israel once again making the claim that they are going to investigate themselves, and this time in regards to Ayşenur Ezgi, a U.S. Turkish citizen who was shot down in Israel at a peaceful protest by what eyewitnesses claim were the IDF shooting into the crowd, and others claiming that this may have been targeted. Yet the U.S. is once again saying that they're leaving it to Israel to investigate themselves. We'll be talking about Bernie Sanders celebrating Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris. That's right, Dick Cheney, one of the most evil men on the planet, one of the most unlikable, responsible for horrific war crimes and atrocities, has endorsed Kamala Harris. So we'll be digging into that a little bit. It is kind of sad to see Bernie celebrating this, but we'll watch the clip and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And lastly, we'll be talking about how this is a story that's not covered very often at all, but we'll be talking about how the Democrats have abandoned the 50-state strategy. So they have now left 75. There are 75% of seats uncontested up and down the ballot this year throughout the country. 75% of seats do not have someone running against them. So there's only one name on the ballot in all of these areas. And most of those ballots are GOP seats. And we'll be talking about why that happened, why red states aren't necessarily red, but more abandoned, and what's happening with the whole vote Democrat up and down the ballot when there's apparently not even a choice in most places to vote for anyone other than the one person on the ticket. So this is a problem, and we'll be discussing that as well. So let's go ahead and dig into it. And hello to everyone who has joined. I see so many familiar faces. Thank you to all the mods that have stopped by. If you guys can, please press the like button, and so that we can kind of get this out to more people. And I'm so excited to get started, and I'm so grateful to be able to join you guys today. So let's talk a little bit about, we're going to kind of launch in with Trump leading in the polls, which is something that is, I would say, a little bit surprising, I think, because we didn't see the same kind of tick up that happens after the Democratic National Convention that usually happens every year. And we've seen instead a deflation of energy. And let's see, if you want to go ahead and pull up the article for us, Colin. Trump and Harris neck and neck after summer upheaval. So New York Times polling shows the survey finds that Donald J. Trump is retaining his support, and that on the eve of the debate, voters are unsure they know enough about where Kamala Harris stands. Now, we won't be covering it in detail today, but she did just release her platform last night on her website. So there is a platform available now. And I know that people have been pensively waiting, as well as hearing from media pundits, Democratic Party leaders, that they were going to, run basically on vibes, and that Kamala could win without a platform. Well, now we are seeing a platform, so you're able to actually go to the website and go through that. So almost among likely voters, shaded areas represent the margin of error. The margin of error is plus or minus 2.8 points. Ooh. Based on New York Times Siena College poll of 1,695 voters nationwide. Okay. Let's see. I think that, okay, here we go. A national poll of likely voters by the New York Times and Siena College found Mr. Trump leading Miss Harris 48% to 47%. So there's a 1 point swing there. Within the poll's 3 percentage point margin of error and largely unchanged from the Times Siena poll taken last July. So we haven't seen much fluctuation. Just after President Biden dropped his reelection bid, Mr. Trump may have had a rough month following the president's departure, and amid the burst of excitement that Miss Harris brought the Democrats, but the polls suggest his support remains remarkably salient. So I think that we have one other here to pull up, and that's the article. Well, first we'll talk about this for just a moment, because I noticed what Jordan shared was the quote from Trump. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But these polls, as you guys realize, oftentimes, and you can take that down now, I think. Thank you so much, Colin. And one thing that I can note is in 2016, we saw fluctuations the entire time. But there is something important here. We do have an uncommitted movement of voters in Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. CARE. CARE is a Muslim group that does advocacy for Arab and Muslim Americans within the United States. Noted that their recent polling is showing that 50% of the voters that they are polling are going to vote third party, and that the majority are still uncommitted to Harris because of her stance on the on Israel's mass atrocities in Gaza and how she's not willing to do an arms embargo or willing to take a stronger stance on that issue, while the infrastructure there is leveled and people are being killed en masse. So this issue is having an impact in the polling. And one of the things that we have noted, which we'll get into in just a little bit, is her current policy stance isn't much different than the stance that Bill Clinton had, that George W. Bush had. George W. Bush was even willing to put arms sanctions on Israel, and that's something that Kamala Harris has said she's not willing to do at this time. So that's where we're at. It's unclear because there's not as much distinction between the candidates when it comes to certain policy platforms, such as immigration, such as the anti-war stance, and those sorts of things, to know exactly where people are going to land. And a lot of voters being pre-polling, ballot polling is showing that there's still a large margin of undecideds within the country. So let's go ahead and get into Trump's crazy comments, absolutely scary comments that he made on Truth Social over the weekend. If you want to pull that article up for us, Colin, we'll talk a little bit about that. Trump threatens lawyers, donors, and election officials with prison for unscrupulous behavior. Trump and his allies filed dozens of unsuccessful cases after the 2020 election in an attempt to overturn the results. I think most of you guys are probably familiar with what went down there, and all the claims were debunked. All the claims that Trump had made that Trump and his team had made about the 2020 elections were debunked. Former President Donald Trump, who makes frequent false claims that the 2020 presidential election was stolen through rampant fraud, warned Saturday that he would try to imprison anyone who engages in unscrupulous behavior during this year's race. He issued the threat on Truth Social, his social media website, and repeated his false claims that the 2020 election was stolen, accusing Democrats of rampant cheating and skullduggery. What the heck is skullduggery? The 2024, this is what Trump has said on Truth Social. The 2024 elections, where votes have just started being cast, will be under the closest professional scrutiny, and when I win, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences, so that this depravity of justice does not happen again, he wrote. He continued, please beware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels unfortunately never seen before in this country. And this article makes a good point. This was one of the most wide-ranging he's made while running for president. This goes far beyond the threats he made in 2020, because here he's talking about political operatives, donors. He's assuming that there's going to be illegal votes, corrupt election officials. So that quote unquote unscrupulous behavior can be so broad in its definition that you never really know exactly what aim he's going to take here. And he's definitely going to take a litigious route post-election. Now, the last election, it's the height of irony, right? Because the last election, Donald Trump was calling delegates, asking delegates and Secretary of States to switch their votes, or to ignore the popular vote in their states in order to favor the party and in order to favor his ticket. So the height of irony in saying that he is going to prosecute people to the fullest extent of the law for some imagined preconceived notion does challenge the fabric of democracy. Now, there's already things happening, such as Biden waiting as long as he did before stepping down in this race, so the Democratic Party didn't really have a primary. That's a problem. That's a problem that we didn't get to actually vote on who is the leading ticket of the Democratic Party, but rather that was just a straight board delegate vote. I mean, this is worse than the superdelegate vote in the 2016 election with Bernie, where superdelegates didn't vote as their counties and their states voted, but instead cast the vote for Hillary. It's worse than this. However, I will say that there's a reason to be worried about this language from Donald Trump, and I do think it turns a leaf, but it is a departure. But if you piece together the crazy things he said in his speeches over the last year, he said all of these things, but maybe not in a thread all together at once on through social, but these are things he's alluded to since the beginning. So it's something to be aware of, and cognizant about as we go into this election. But it does look like he is going to take a litigious route. We're not hearing about prosecuting people in the same way, but we are starting to hear similar rattlings about fears of election interference or fears of elections being tampered with by the Democratic Party. So there's going to be a lot of, I believe, a lot of back and forth between both parties this election cycle about what is legitimate or not. You already have the Democratic Party that's pushed the Green Party off of 3 ballots, or attempted to push the Green Party off of 3 ballots this year. They've attempted to push them off, all of them. Most of them failed and didn't even make it to the court system, but 3 did. So we already have democratic processes underway. And so I think that this is going to be a highly sticky situation. And it is scary that Trump is saber rattling to such an extreme and talking about locking up anyone that he could deem as interfering with the election. You know, who knows? That could be people posting on social media for all we know. It's so unclear. And after the Russiagate scare and other things, it's untelling where this could go. So let's move on here, and let's talk about how Israel has once again said, or the United States officials have once again said, that Israel should investigate itself, as they have so many other times with everything from the hospital bombings 6 months ago to the discovery of mass graves, more than 6 mass graves with hundreds of people discovered in Gaza, with the World Kitchen Workers being intentionally bombed by the IDF, which included U.S. citizens that were killed in that instance as well. The list is so long, you could sit down for 30 minutes and go through the horrific crimes that the U.S. government has said that Israel should investigate themselves on. You have the brutality at the detention centers, at the concentration camps, where they're holding people without trial, there's doctors there, there's aid workers there, professors. It's very small amount of combatants as far as we can tell. And as far as reporting from Amnesty Internationals and others are showing, yet they're sexually assaulting prisoners and torturing them on a daily basis. Horrors coming out of those prisons. And yet, just a week and a half ago, Anthony Blinken once again said Israel will investigate themselves regarding the use of torture, the same week that the Democratic Party removed torture from their platform, being against torture from their platform at the DNC, was removed the same week that Antony Blinken said Israel can investigate themselves on these claims of torture. So let's get into this a little bit, and let's watch a clip from Vedant Patel today where he is answering a question from Rabi Toran, who's a White House correspondent, and she asks him about the murder of Ayşenur Ezgi Aigi, who is a U.S. Turkish citizen who was at a peaceful protest in Palestine, in the West Bank, and was shot dead over the weekend on Friday. So if you could pull that up real quick, Colin, and we'll take a listen to the video.
More information regarding killing of Ayşenur 3 days after her killing in the West Bank. Actually, all the information available indicate that she was killed by an Israeli sniper. Eyewitnesses say that she was killed by an Israeli sniper. Autopsy report say that she was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper. Your ally, NATO ally, Turkey, says that she was murdered by Israel. So what sort of information you are looking for? Do you have any doubt that she was killed by Israel?
I appreciate all that you're sharing, but there is a process that we have to respect and let play out here. Our partners in Israel have indicated that they are conducting a process and that they will make public their findings. Again, we expect that to happen as swiftly as possible, and we expect that process to be thorough. We expect that process to be transparent. Of course, eyewitness reporting and facts from those that were there are, of course, important, but there are, of course, other factors that go into such a finding, and we're going to let that process play out. I understand how troubling this news continues to be. It's troubling for all of us as well, but it's also important that we not get ahead of the processes that are laid out.
But you were very quick to determine that Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg was killed by Hamas in Gaza. And have you ever sought for further information regarding his killing? And if, why haven't you shown the same quick response and reaction to the killing of Ayşenur?
So, respectfully, Rabia, I understand that how tragic this loss of life was, and how deeply heartbreaking it is for so many people. But as I said to Simon, each circumstance is different, and let's be really clear and make sure that we are not conflating the direct murder of American and Israeli citizens, hostages, being held by a terrorist group, being murdered by members of Hamas. Each circumstance is unique and different, and any time an American citizen or a civilian loses their life, it is incredibly tragic. But the circumstances around how that happens is important. The facts matter, and I'm just not going to get ahead of the process as it relates to this.
Ayşenur's family called for an independent investigation. Would you support this call?
So, look, what you just heard me say to Simon, we expect Israel to make their findings public. We expect those findings to be shared, transparently and as thoroughly and as soon as possible. Beyond that, I'm just not going to get ahead of what those findings determine, and should those require any additional steps needing to be taken. Said, go ahead.
Thank you.
Disgusting. That's disgusting. And it's understandable when an American citizen was killed in Gaza who was held a hostage, that there was a strong stance taken on that. However, there was no call for an investigation. There were no eyewitnesses. We're unclear what happened in that case. Yet an hour later, an hour after it was reported, Joe Biden was on Twitter saying that they would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and that we were going to do everything we can to back Israel. An hour later. Yet, when it comes to Aishanur, they're going to say that Israel can investigate themselves, essentially, that they don't have enough information. And it was a peaceful protest. The protest was fired into. She was shot in the head, assassination style, which we know has happened in the past. We have, for instance, American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. She was an Al Jazeera reporter. She was killed in 2022. She's a Palestinian American journalist. She was covering a raid by the Israel Defense Forces at the Jenin refugee camp. And yet, Israel claimed then, we'll investigate ourselves. This investigation took nearly a year before they came back and they said, yeah, we think that that happened. We may or may not try the IDF soldiers who shot her intentionally. And on top of that, they raided Shireen Abu Akleh's funeral. And US did nothing. When Rachel Corrie, a protester in 2001, was mowed down by settlers in the West Bank and by the IDF, Israel claimed, we will investigate ourselves. And it didn't come out until years later. And the IDF still celebrates her death by having pancake parties, which is disgusting. Absolutely horrific. Horrific. Their response to this is the same as their response to every single Palestinian life that has been snuffed out in Gaza and now in the raids on the West Bank. If you think that they care more about us, that these oligarchs and these people in power in the Biden administration and the GOP who supports this, the Democratic Party who supports this, cares about us as U.S. citizens more, or that we somehow have some benevolence over the people of the United States, they don't. And all lives should be equally valued. But they have said time and time again, if U.S. citizens are impacted, they'll do something. Well, multiple have died. In the West Bank, they have died. In Gaza, they have been killed. They have been bombed. U.S. citizens, yes, as well, have been bombed and killed. But every single life should matter, whether it's Palestinian, whether it's American. But these are the same people. These are the same people that are building cop cities across the country, and we have covered this on Status Coup. They are building cop cities, and as Tina Desiree Berg and others have covered, and Jordan has covered, they are also using IDF, Israel Defense Forces, to train our police. The tactic where you bend the knee on the neck of an individual is an apartheid tactic that comes directly from Israel. Directly from IDF apartheid tactics. They're training our police, and protesters are being shot. I understand that a lot of people are afraid of Trump getting elected. I'm afraid of that as well, because they say that he'll attack protesters. He's going to call in the military or the National Guard. We're already seeing that. We already saw that with the pro-Palestinian protest on campus. We've already seen it with Biden's laws that he's using, quote unquote, domestic terrorism laws to arrest people at Cop City and charge them through the DOJ. And now we're seeing it where protesters are being fired onto in the West Bank. An American citizen gets 'and our officials are dragging their feet and they're going to say the same thing that they say about cops here. They can investigate themselves. The police are going to investigate themselves. The Israeli Defense Forces are going to investigate themselves. Now, I do have one more video from just a couple days ago that Pram Thacker Pram Thacker from the Intercept posted, and if you could play that for us really quick, Colin.
Oh, which one did you say?
That's the one that's I said pull Blinken on the document. It's the statement.
Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. Mr. Secretary, we've seen these reports this morning about the killing of an American in the West Bank. Could you tell us a little bit about what you know about the killing of that American, Aishanur Ejih? What's your message for Americans who are concerned that you are providing military aid to a country that is killing U.S. citizens? And is there ever a point at which the killing of Americans in that region could lead to a change in U.S. policy of weapons provision?
Michael, thank you. First, I just want to extend my deepest condolences, the deepest condolences of the United States government, to the family of Aishanur Ejih. We deplore this tragic loss. Now, the most important thing to do is to gather the facts, and that's exactly what we're in the process of doing. And we are intensely focused on getting those facts. And any actions that we take are driven by the facts. So first things first, let's find out exactly what happened, and we will draw the necessary conclusions and consequences from that. As you've heard me say many times before, I have no higher priority than the safety and protection of American citizens around the world, wherever they are. Something I take with the utmost seriousness. So as we have more info, we'll share it, we'll make it available, and as necessary, we'll act on it.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh,
There
I
we
was
go.
muted. Sorry about that. I must have tapped my mic. I apologize. But thoughts and prayers. We're going to get thoughts and prayers. And Israel's going to investigate themselves. They're not going to allow for independent investigation. I will note that they have still not allowed for an independent investigation of what happened to the World Kitchen workers. They have not allowed an independent investigation of the massed graves found outside of 3 Gazan hospitals. They have not allowed an investigation into the school that was recently bombed that killed more than 75 individuals. Horrific scene. They have not allowed an independent investigation into the fact that infrastructure has been systematically targeted in Gaza. They have not allowed an independent investigation into land sales of Gaza that are already being sold off. You know, you hear people say, oh, if, you know, Trump gets elected, which there's truth to this, then it'll allow for more land sales in the West Bank and Gaza. But that Jared Kushner is going to come in and buy it all up. Well, I have news for people. That is happening now. Jared Kushner is buying it up now. People are buying it up right now. It's already happening. This is already in motion. And you also have Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and others saying that they are going to occupy they're going to occupy Gaza indefinitely. And attempts now are underway to annex the West Bank, which is where this U.S. citizen was assassinated on Friday. So I did want to show you guys, Kamala has released her platform, and I want you all to keep in mind that this platform is exactly the same as what the Democratic National Committee released. So I did want to read that to you. If you could pull that up for us, Colin. Oh, the image of the platform. Thank you. Sorry, I had skipped that article. I apologize. I had just mentioned it and instead of pulling up the article. Vice President Harris, and this is directly from Harris's website, where she now has multiple points of policy up, which finally, right, people have been waiting for the policy, so you can go there and check out her policy. We won't be covering that today, but that has been posted. Vice President Harris will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to protect U.S. forces and interest from Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. Vice President Harris will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and she will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, meaning we're going to give them weapons. Regardless of what happens, we're just going to keep giving Israel weapons. She and President Biden are working to end the war in Gaza such that Israel is secure. So first off, that's the main priority. The hostages are released and the suffering in Gaza ends. And the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. So the question here that is not addressed in this policy is, why do Palestinian people not have the right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination? Well, that's because they're under an apartheid. And this doesn't address that at all. Oh, there was one more line. I'm sorry. She and President Biden are working around the clock to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire done. Okay, that's it. But this, one thing I want to note is back in 2007, George W. Bush had this exact same policy, almost down to the letter, the exact same words. There was one difference, or there was two major differences. One, he acknowledged the outpost, and this is crazy. I'm not defending George W. Bush. I think that he is a war criminal, was one of the worst presidents in modern history. I am not a fan of George W. Bush. But the fact does remain, as milquetoast as it was, he did say that he went there and that it was an apartheid. He called it an occupation. He called it an apartheid. We have not heard that from the Biden and Harris administration. We have not heard that. They do not use those words. He also put sanctions on the arms being given to Israel for the Iron Dome at the time, making sure that they don't encroach any further in the West Bank, and to loosen restrictions on food and water in Gaza and allow more aid in. So that is something that happened in 2007 and 2008. Was it enough? Heck no. Was it a Band-Aid? Yes. But what's staggering is that George W. Bush was to the left of Harris and Biden on this issue, as milquetoast and menial as it was, and with all the violence in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's appalling to me. I'm not celebrating George Bush. I'm saying that it's extraordinarily problematic that we have a Democratic president and vice president in office that aren't even doing as much as George W. Bush. They won't even call it an occupation. Under mass atrocities, this is happening. Under the worst atrocities we've seen in Gaza and the West Bank, in the history of what they call a conflict, but is actually a genocide, an apartheid. So speaking of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, we'll move on to our next crazy story that is in a similar vein. Did you guys hear over the weekend that Liz and Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris and endorsed their campaign under the guise of, quote unquote, saving democracy, but nonetheless endorse them? And so we're going to talk about that for just a minute. Here's a clip. I'm going to go ahead and share a clip of Bernie's response to this endorsement and let you guys hear what he had to say.
I let you go. I do have to ask you about her recent endorsements by two people who are not progressives at all. Of course, I'm talking about Dick and Liz Cheney. This week, they said they're going to support her. They're going to vote for her. It's worth noting, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney voted with former President Trump more than 90% of the time, was quite critical when President Biden picked her as his running mate. Would you welcome seeing Liz Cheney out on the campaign trail?
Well, Kristen, what I think Dick and Liz Cheney are saying is that in this existential moment in American history, it's not just issues. Cheney and I agree on nothing, no issues. But what we do believe in is that the United States should retain its democratic foundations. And it's not just Cheney. I think there is a significant number of Republicans that say, well, you know, I may not agree with the vice president on this issue or that issue, but I cannot support somebody who's a pathological liar, somebody who fomented a insurrection to overthrow the election return. So I applaud the Cheneys for their courage in defending democracy. Obviously, on all the issues, we have very different points of view.
All right.
So he applauds them for defending democracy, but of course, on other issues, they have very different points of view. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't believe that an endorsement from Dick Cheney is helpful. I think that the Democratic Party strategy on this, and what pundits and the Democrats are kind of hinting at, and I've seen a lot of people that, you know, support Kamala celebrating it, saying that it's going to bring in Republicans. But this is another example of where, and for those of you that don't know, I worked in politics for 10 years. I used to advise campaigns. I advised more than 100 non-establishment progressive campaigns, folks like AOC, Cori Bush. I worked for Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats. So I'm really familiar with sort of I have seen the races that we ran against, and I have heard people talk from inside the Democratic Party. And there is this idea, there's a mythology about, you know, middle America and about places like Appalachia, and they believe that this is going to bring in Republican votes. Dick Cheney is universally hated among independents, Democrats, and most conservatives. When he left office, he had an 11% approval rating. Most people disapprove of both the Afghan and the Iraqi wars. So Dick Cheney he was knee deep in those wars. He was one of the architects of the Iraq war. So people remember. Oh, it is not Appalachia. It's Appalachia for sure. I just saw that comment. I had to throw that in, honey. It's Appalachia. But anyway, the Iraq war was so unpopular because so many people died, because it drained trillions at the end of it from American coffers. It was used as an excuse to heighten the police state, to heighten the surveillance state, for the Patriot Act, for renditioning people at Guantanamo Bay. There were so many elements to this that happened under Cheney's watch. But I do find it a bit ironic that, well, maybe not ironic, may not be the right word, but the fact that Kamala Harris is VP during an ongoing genocide where we are spending billions to arm Israel as they murder people. And we did the same thing, or did something similar. I wouldn't say the same thing. We did something similar in Iraq. And the idea is that because she's just VP, she's not accountable for what's happening in Gaza, for Israel's actions, for arming Israel. She's not accountable because she's not president. She's just VP. If we applied that same standard to Dick Cheney, we don't. It wouldn't be valid to apply the same standard to Dick Cheney, and it's not valid to apply that standard to Kamala either. But yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about it. Would love to hear in the chat what you guys think about this endorsement, but I do not think that it is going to help Kamala in the long run because he is universally hated. One of the most hated figures in America. It's not going to give people confidence to hear that Dick Cheney feels like this is saving democracy. I feel like there's a likelihood it could alienate even more people. Now, there's enough time before election that people forget about things in 10 minutes these days. But the fact is, I think that this is a problematic endorsement. I do have an article here about some of the reasons he's endorsing Kamala. If you want to pull that up for us so we can take a look. Let's see. Dick Cheney reveals his reasons for endorsing Kamala over Donald Trump. Former Vice President and influential Republican Dick Cheney released a statement announcing his endorsement of Democratic nominee Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Speaking out against the Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump, Cheney said he can never be trusted with power again. Well, some may agree with that. I agree with that. In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump, Cheney, 83, said in a statement shared on September 6th. So he said this just a few days ago. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him, he continued. Alrighty. Cheney, who served as vice president under George W. Bush between 2001 and 2009, went on to say that American citizens have a duty to prioritize the nation over partisan politics. The statement came Friday, hours after one of Cheney's daughters, former Wyoming Republican Representative Liz Cheney, revealed on a panel at the Texas Tribune's annual festival that her father will be voting for Harris. If you think about the movement we're in and you think about how serious this moment is, my dad believes, and he said publicly, there has never been an individual in our country who is as grave a threat to our democracy as Donald Trump is, she said on a panel moderated by journalist Mark Lebovich. Cheney's endorsement marks the most high-profile Republican politician to announce that they will vote for Harris over Republican nominee Donald Trump, further spotlighting other former establishment Republicans who have yet to come out to endorse Trump during this run for presidency, many of whom have been critical of Trump in the past, including his own former Vice President Mike Pence, former President George W. Bush, and former Republican nominee for President Mitt Romney. Harris's campaign responded in a statement Friday supporting the endorsement. The vice president is proud to have the support of Vice President Cheney and deeply respects his courage to put country over party, said campaign chair Jen O'Malley Dillon. And she also said, a lot of what I think is happening. Oh, no, that's not her. Okay. Harris was asked about Cheney's endorsement while on the campaign trail visiting a spice shop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She said she was honored to have their endorsement and that it represented the opportunity to turn the page on partisan divisiveness. If you can pull up that, oh, hold on. There's a little bit more here than it has in the tweet. A lot of what I think is happening, and I was just talking with some folks here in Pittsburgh about, is that people are exhausted about the division and the attempts to kind of divide us as Americans, Harris told reporters. And them stepping up to make this public statement, I think, is courageous. Okay. We can pull that off. Let's pull up the tweet that we had. And I need to plug in my computer really quick. But if you want to go ahead and pull that tweet up on the screen, my dog just unplugged my computer. I want to make sure it doesn't die on me. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. He trips over wires sometimes, and she pulled it out. We got it fixed. Okay, so Nanita Bose posted, Kamala Harris took a break from debate prep and visited Penzeys Spices in Pittsburgh on Saturday. She told the pool she was honored to have Dick Cheney's endorsement, and it's time to turn the page on divisiveness and bring the country together. You want to scroll down so we can see the photo, Colin? Oh, yeah, there we go. That one lady's response in the back is exactly how I feel right now. But this is, I would love to hear what you guys think about this. If anyone has any chats or super chats, I'll take a look at the comments, but I don't necessarily believe that, like I had said, it is a winning strategy. I think that between her marching toward the right on immigration and Trumpian immigration policy with hiring thousands of more border patrol, the toughest border in decades. On top of that, she has the policy of militarizing the police. She has a policy of her pro-war stance with Israel, her comments during her speech at the DNC where she was going to create the most lethal and support the most lethal military in the world. Odd choice of words, not comforting whatsoever, but very, very neoconservative, very neocon. It reminds me of Republicans back in 2010, 2008, 2010. The Republicans maybe 10 years ago. This is the type of rhetoric we heard from Republicans. So I feel like the Democratic Party has shifted further right. And I think getting an endorsement from Cheney is an indication that they're shifting further right. And that's problematic. I believe that no matter where people fall on voting, that they should be ready to be out day one. They should be out now protesting the current administration's cop cities, police militarization, horrible border practices, and of course the genocide in Israel, which should be a number one priority. But should also be ready no matter who is president on day one after the swearing in, because it's very unclear where we're going to be. It is very clear that the party has shifted. Their platform has shifted. They've now taken off the Democrats during the DNC also took off being against corporal punishment. So we have that as well now. On they've taken off their anti-torture stance off their platform, which is very alarming and disturbing considering what situation we're in right now. And now we're getting endorsements from people like Dick Cheney being celebrated. So if nothing else, from a seeding our value standpoint as human beings and seeding our humanity because of the fear of Trump, we've reached that wall. I truly believe we're past the point of seeding that humanity and going into an area where the two parties look a hell of a lot alike at this point. And it's scary to see an endorsement from Dick Cheney being celebrated. Because for one, it's not going to help. And for two, what this does is normalizes Dick Cheney, one of the greatest war criminals of our time. And they might as well celebrate an endorsement from Henry frickin' Kissinger. Right? And probably would if the guy was still with us. But yeah, we're going to move on now. And yeah, Al, that's right. This has a lot to do with AIPAC and with funding and with, as Jordan always talks about, the United Corporations of America and placating donors. It's not, I mean, these policies aren't popular. That's the thing. You know what policies are popular? Medicare for all, tuition-free college, subsidies for childcare and for pre-K, federal jobs guarantee, These are the kinds of things that are actually popular. But we see very little of that on the platform. And what we do see, a lot of it is corporate bailouts and corporate subsidies and privatization of public programs, further privatization of public programs. And so this is, regardless of how you vote, it's important to know what you're walking into on day one of a new presidency. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the 50-state strategy being abandoned. I don't know if you guys have heard of the 50-state strategy before, but it is something that the Democratic Party used to tout. They used to be like, we're running in all 50 states. Now, you will hear someone, I heard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying it the other day, vote down ballot, vote down ballot. I hear it from people from places like California, New York, all the time. And I understand in their states, people are running for the most part. There is competition in their states. But starting in the early 2000s, around 23 states were defunded by the Democrat Party. So the state parties in those states were defunded by Democratic Party National. And the problem is these are states that have less money. These are places like the South, Appalachian states, and many of these states, believe it or not, was blue. People would have a hard time believing me if I said Alabama was blue, but I'm about to show you guys that. And no, it wasn't just Dixiecrats. They had a large base of Black representatives in Alabama that were progressive. But when the Democratic Party defunded them in 2003, they left the seats abandoned essentially because it was very hard to raise money to run. And on top of that, when the Dem Party decided to switch their strategy to supporting presidential candidates over the 50-state strategy and to supporting select states such as solidly blue states, and sort of left the red, or not the red states, but left these areas to the wind, the GOP came in with billions and dumped in billions. And this was a Heritage Foundation Project 2000, because they've had a Project 2000, Project 2004, Project 2008, Project 2012. Guess what was in the Project 2008? Mitt Romney's healthcare plan, which became the Affordable Care Act, which was a way to privatize Medicaid and Medicare specifically and hand it over to the insurance companies, which they succeeded in. And guess which party did that for them? The Democrats. I mean, along with the Republicans. But yeah, Obama was the one that was in office and that pushed that forward. So let's talk a little bit about this messaging around. Right now, we're hearing a lot of messaging from the Democratic Party about vote up and down ballot, about real worries of anti-LGBTQ legislation, real worries about reproductive rights, real worries about what's happening at our school boards and the school voucher programs and school choice programs that's defunding our public schools in so many states. We have real worries about programs such as federal housing being cut, which is actually being done at right now at the national level under Biden, but that's a whole other story. And we're told vote up and down the ballot, but vote blue. I live in a county in eastern Kentucky, and the place where I live, there's no one running. I'll be able to vote third party for the presidential ticket if I want, but there is nobody running, and I plan to personally, but there's nobody running in any other seat. It's just GOP seats up and down the board. So I'm voting on a ballot measure, an important ballot measure in Kentucky, and I'm voting in the presidential election. The rest, I have no choice because there's nobody running. But the thing is, this isn't a one-off. This is happening all across the country. Can you pull up the pictures of the states, and I'll show people this pattern of when the other one of the like Alabama, like the party control ones. Yeah. So if you guys can check this out, and you guys can see in 94, 95, 96, all the way up to 2010, Alabama had a Democratic Party majority in the state house. And as I said, they weren't all Dixiecrats. These voters in places like Alabama, Georgia below had a Democratic Party state house for 30 years almost, up until 2002. The reason these people in these states voted Dem was because they believed that that's who supported unions. They believed they voted Dem after the New Deal, hoping for the New Deal to come to them again, right? Hoping that some Democratic president will bring them the New Deal. So part of the turnover has to do with losing faith in the Democratic Party, but the largest push was the divestment in the states. If you could show the other one with Kentucky, North Carolina, and West Virginia. Yeah, check this out. North Carolina has had a Democratic governor almost always. Very rarely have they had a Republican governor. Same in Kentucky. So in statewide races, the Democrat is winning. Kentucky had a state house majority up until the early 2000s. And in the 90s, we had what was called the bitch caucus. That's what they called. They called them the bitch caucus, and the women wore it proudly because a few men would call them that derisively in the state house. But these women, mostly Black women, had a huge, they were a huge, I wouldn't say minority, but they had a huge caucus within the state house. And they passed the first Violence Against Women's Act. We passed the first in 1998. Kentucky passed the first statewide LGBTQ protections. We also had reproductive rights secured. But that year, 2000, is when the Democratic Party decided to completely defund and gut our state in Kentucky because we're poor. They weren't getting the multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar donors, and this got even worse after Citizens United, as you can imagine. But it was no secret that this was their plan was to divest in these states, let be what be, and go to the place where there's money. The DNC is a corporation. It's going to go where the money's at. And so that's what they did. So instead of fundraising nationwide and helping the states that are poor and don't have as much robust economies, not only grow their economies, but also help fund their state parties, they just completely divested in them. And that's when the GOP saw a door open and they swooped in with billions. Now you can see something similar in North Carolina, and look at West Virginia. And there is a slight mythology about Dixiecrats, which did exist. But these states, Kentucky, North Carolina, and West Virginia and Appalachia, were more Democrat leaning because this is also where the labor movement rose up in the South. These are the people that fought against coal towns and script towns. These are the people that wore the red bandanas. That's where the term redneck comes from. So there's great opportunity in these states to run, but people aren't running. If you can pull up, I guess, the article now, Colin, we'll take a look at the article real quick. But I don't know if if that kind of blows your mind, looking at the fact that these states used to be quote unquote blue. Red states aren't so red, y'all. That's a mythology, and we're often pointed to fearmonger to raise money, but the truth is we were abandoned. Okay, true. Dixiecrats are all over the United States. But let's see how the Democratic Party abandoned rural voters on the perils of allowing party committees outside urban areas to wither. Okay, let's take a look at this article from the Dispatch that posted recently. In places like Globe, Arizona, voting for Democratic candidates used to be like a breathing reflex. The copper mining town produced 2 state governors and a reliable stream of liberal-minded legislators up until about 20 years ago, when a shift replicated across rural America, changing everything. Now this is reliable Trump country, and almost every local office is a Republican. The Gila County Democratic Party still exists, but the few times that volunteers have volunteered to Globe to knock on the doors of people still registered with the party, they get a customary response: "We're so surprised to see you here." The Gila County Democratic Party. Oh no, we just sorry. Go up. I didn't read that one paragraph, I think. Oh no, I did. You're more on top of it than I am, Colin. I'm sorry. I need glasses too, you guys. So I'm struggling. I get them in a couple weeks. Okay, all right. Even though Arizona has become one of 6 swing states that will decide the 2024 presidential election, the state and national Democratic parties have ignored the rural parts of the state where 20% of the electorate lives outside of an urban area, and yet where 7 of 15 county committees are either non-existent or barely functional, according to Tom Przinski of Rural Arizona Action. "All we have is a handful of old ladies," Gila County Democratic Chair Chris Cinco told me. "We don't have the boots on the ground or the skills nor the candidates." The July 30th primary election featured exactly 0 Democrats who ran for any county office. The ideological turn of rural America toward Donald Trump and the Republican Party has been a pivotal story of national politics for the last 8 years. The subject of a shelf of books, true, and the journalistic cliche of asking blue-collar workers in Midwestern diners why they went ideologically MAGA. But the less appreciated part of the story is not about ideology, this is what's really important, but about tactics. The scythe of Trumpism cut so cleanly through American farm and ranch country, not so much because voters radically changed their beliefs, but because Democrats made the disastrous strategic decision to abandon them. Of the 3,244 counties in the U.S., slightly more than 300 of them now have active and vigorous Democratic Party committees, according to Cody Longing of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative. Most of those can be found in big cities and wealthy suburbs. More than 1,000 counties have no structure whatsoever. In meetings, on board, often no local candidates, and some not even showing a listed contact person. The decay in Arizona is entirely typical. This year's presidential election may be out in the same urban-rural divide for Democrats, but the further could be different if the party is willing to make a course correction. While the ideological retreat from rural places arguably had its roots in the Democratic turn toward Wall Street and free trade during Bill Clinton's presidency, the practical shift can be dated more precisely. With a squad of youthful voters and deep trench of computerized block-by-block voter data, the upstart Illinois Senator Barack Obama pulled off an upset in Iowa caucus in 2008. Sorry about that. Obama and his allies sought to neuter the DNC's power in future elections by starving it out of money and energy it had used to prop up the rural counties. Exactly. That's not where the real votes were anyway, to say nothing of donor money. All that, the thinking went, could be found in Charlotte suburbs, in Silicon Valley, on Wall Street, and in the hip creative course of revitalizing downtown. For every blue-collar Democrat we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we will pick up 2 moderate Republicans in the suburbs in Philadelphia, and you can repeat that in Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin, said Senator Chuck Schumer. So you guys see, they're abandoning Democrats in rural areas. They're abandoning left-leaning people in rural areas to pick up moderate Republicans in the suburbs in Philly, Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin. They're abandoning left-leaning people in rural areas, in these areas, in these entire swaths of the country, entire states, in order to appeal to Republicans in the burbs. That is why you've seen the party shift. And that is why you have seen states like Florida, you've seen states like Kentucky, West Virginia, North Carolina, all go red. It's not because they're red. Chuck Schumer right now is admitting they're not red. We just don't fund their state parties. But then they'll turn around and at the same time, they will use those states to fearmonger while the people there are suffering, and the people there have minority rule. And I say minority rule because they have a state house that does not represent them. Only 11% of the country support let's take Kentucky, for example, because it's the same as all these states. Only 9% of people in Kentucky support Kentucky's strict abortion laws, anti-abortion laws. Only 9%. We have a minority state house. We have a state house that does not represent us. So we do need to build a party here. I think that people should run independent and people should run third party, because people have lost faith in the Democratic Party because they abandoned us. And people know that. And now they don't even want to vote Democrat as much anymore. And that's understandable. Colin, if you could pull up the map and first pull up the Ballotopedia clip that I have with like the highlighted text. Thank you. So throughout 2024, this page, so this is from Ballotopedia. Let's read what's listed here. An uncontested election, just to clarify again, is a election where only one person is running. The seat's theirs. There's nobody running against them. So through August 2024, Ballotopedia has covered 34,736 elections in 55 states and territories. Of that, 26,006, 75% were uncontested. And only 8,730 were contested. And they go on to say 75% uncontested elections is the highest rate Ballotopedia has covered at this point in the year since data collecting began in 2018. And I will tell you, it was very high in the early 2000s as well, because those states were completely abandoned. So we saw a similar thing. And if you could pull up the map for me too, Colin, while we're on this, and we could take a look at that map. Check out this map. The dark green and the green areas that are the darkest green. So 50 to 75% is kind of like that lighter green, and then the darker blue green is 75% or more counties or seats are uncontested. So if you look at that, Texas, California has a pretty high rate, actually. That's surprising. Washington State has more than 75%. Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, West Virginia. This is insane. So most of the country, no one is running. There's only one person running for the seats up and down the ballot. But yet we're distracted with POTUS only, as if POTUS is going to save us, when most at the presidential race, as president's going to save us, when most of the laws that impact us the most are local, right? The potholes in our street, it's the school lunches for our kids, it's how much money goes to the schools, it's housing programs, jobs programs, domestic, support for domestic violence victims, social programs. Let's see, programs to combat the opioid addiction and to help people recovery programs, healthcare programs. state funding for schools. So I wanted to show this to you guys because I've been covering it for a while, and I've been working on an article about this for a while, and that's the first time that I have seen it covered by someone else. I got super excited that someone else was talking about it, because if any of you guys are close to my age, I'm getting up there. I can remember when the 50 state strategy was a huge conversation, and when Howard Dean attempted to do the 50 state strategy in 2005 and flipped several state houses, but then the Democratic Party smeared him and basically called it ineffective when it really wasn't. It wasn't that it was ineffective. It's that they didn't care about people in places like Alabama, West Virginia, Wyoming. And so yeah, that's what we've got with that. And from that, we'll kind of wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for joining. And did we have any super chats, Colin, that we needed to read?
Yeah, I can pull them up right here.
Cool. Oh, Tony, hi. Let's see, $5 US. Harris released, oh, thank you so much, Tony. Harris released a plan for LGBTQ people like me, and that's the exact same as their 2014 policy. They haven't updated it. Awesome to see you. Love the fab hair and shirt. Thank you so much, Tony. It's so good to see you too, my friend. Hi, Zeynab. Thank you so much, Teresa. Hi, Zeynab. Good to see you back on Status Coup. It's so good to come and guest host sometimes. I love it. Thank you so much, Teresa. Let's see, Kimmy, good to see you. Harris seems to be happy to read whatever lines they give her. It's frightening, as if there are other people running it all. Yeah, exactly. She's an empty suit. Say anything that is put in front of her on a teleprompter, and that doesn't really give us confidence, because people don't really know who she is. I mean, at least now they have a platform, but I mean, she said she's wanted open borders and Medicare for all in 2020, so it's hard to know where she stands on anything. Was that the last one?
Yep, that was all of them.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. A little bit about what's coming up. So, just a reminder of Jordan's book. He will be touring, and he was up in New York yesterday, so he's traveling, and that's why I covered for him today. Or in DC. Sorry, he was in Washington DC with Crystal Ball, and yeah, there's Crystal. The book is called We the Poison, Exposing the Flint Water Crisis Cover-Up and the Poisoning of 100,000 Americans. You can find it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And one thing I'll say about it is it's a pretty astounding book. I feel like it's a bellwether of what's happening across the country in so many areas that have been poisoned by corporations. You know, it's a story that's as important as the one that, you know, put the spotlight on Aaron Brockovich, I believe, or maybe even more so, because it goes all the way up. It goes all the way up to the governor's office, and it even involved Obama ignoring the crisis. And it's so convoluted, and it includes issues with the dangers of public-private partnerships and the privatization of commodities like water. Our water is being privatized across the country by American Water and other conglomerates, and that's scary, because we have no guarantee. There's limited quality controls that this water is going to be safe. And as an Appalachian who lives in a region with water that's been polluted my whole life, and people that, you know, have died from preventable illnesses because of the pollution here, it is something of concern. And I believe it's an important read, because it's lessons to be learned. And the people in the book say that, take this and learn. and know what to watch out for in your own communities. It's part of why they share their story, not only to fight for clean water for themselves, but to help people fight against this type of exploitation everywhere. So I think that it's a really important read. Also, you'll want to check out some of Status Coup's latest reporting, because Jordan does even more updates on Flint. When he went to visit Flint, Michigan for the launch of the book, he talked to a lot of organizers there to see where they're at now. And just to let you guys know, I'll be going on 1,000 with Ron Placone tomorrow at, I believe it's 5 p.m., 3 p.m. Eastern. And you can find Ron at Ron Placone on YouTube. So I'm so excited to talk to Ron. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be fun because I always love talking to him and we always have a good time. And we laugh a lot, but then also laugh to keep from crying. So that should be interesting. And I'm sure we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the things we talked about today. As well as independent third parties running for office, that kind of thing. We usually get into that when we chat. So I am launching a new channel tomorrow on Bullhorn Bulletin. I'll be putting out 3 different articles, some of which we covered today. So the 3 different articles are focused on the abandoned states. I give more details on that, a little bit more history on how the states were abandoned, where the money went. I follow the money. I also have an article coming out on why Greens or any third party has to run a candidate. An established third party has to run a presidential candidate in order to maintain state party status. That's something a lot of people don't realize. They're like, why just not run? But if they didn't run, they wouldn't have state party status in order to be able to maybe run and contest some of these seats that the Democrats are just leaving wide open in 65 to 70% of seats across the country. We need someone to fill the gap. But if they don't run a POTUS and POTUS doesn't get 2 to 5% in most of these states, then what ends up happening is they lose state party status. Now, candidates can still run independent, but it's so much easier to run under a party infrastructure. And so that's one of the reasons that they have to run POTUS. Each state has really crazy different guidelines for state ballot access. You have state ballot access. You have state status, you got the rules to maintain state status, and then you got the rules for the candidates to run themselves. So it's there's a lot to it, but that's one of the reasons that they do run president. So it's not necessarily a wasted vote if it's to maintain that so that we can fight down ballot in some of these races that are abandoned, which I think is important for people to know, because that's not a story that is covered on mainstream media, obviously. Have you guys heard that 85% of seats are abandoned and uncontested? I've not heard it once on mainstream media, which is kind of wild. I'm also writing about how movements get abandoned when a Democrat gets elected, how to watch out for that. We don't want to do that with Palestine, but how I've seen it happen with things like Medicare for All, abolish ICE, BLM, how when a president gets in office, or just because of flash pan activism, things get forgotten. And the last one I'll be working on, which will come out a little bit later on in the week, is Project 2025 and how it's not new. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that there's been a project 1985 or 1984 all the way up. So we've had Heritage Foundation has been doing these types of projects forever. A lot of Reaganomics and a lot of Reagan's platform came from the Heritage Foundation, but so did Bill Clinton's, so did George W. Bush, so did Obama's, and so has Biden's. So it's interesting to dig into that and also to look at how this year's is different, and there's alarming things in there. And to also see where it could be different with the GOP, but then also where the Democratic Party could potentially do the work of the Heritage Foundation, which they have done many, many, many times. And we'll be talking about that in this article. So, if you guys can go to bullhornbulletin.com and sign up. I'll be doing my launch. I got a video coming out interviewing Chuck Modi. Several other people will be interviewed. very excited about that coming up. We'll have multiple videos, and whoever signs up for $5 a month, you'll also have access to my book coming out next spring, because I held off on it because this election cycle got so crazy I had to include it in there. But it'll be coming out in the spring. It's called Bernie, Boom, and Bust. So for $5 a month, you'll get access to the book. You'll also get access to training for campaigns and nonprofits in communications and organizing for free. So I'll be doing free trainings closer to election cycle, which would be really cool. And then if you do sign up for $3 a month, you'll get all the updates, but then you'll also get access to weekly AMAs, or bi-weekly AMAs, which will be fun, and people can just come on and shoot in, and we'll have guests and stuff like that. So yeah, you guys, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed to Status Coup. Please donate to Status Coup if you can, because they're doing a ton of on-the-ground work, and it's really important. If you can sign up for Substack, if you can check out my Twitter at zeynabday.com, and also help with my launch, I'd appreciate that. And thank you guys so much for joining. I hope it was informative, and I really enjoyed sharing this space with you today. And see you.